Rick Rediske. Rick is an emeritus professor of water resources at the Annis Water Resources Institute at Grand Valley State University. Rick has co-authored 68 scientific articles concerning water quality issues. He was awarded over $12 million in federal and state grants for scientific research projects involving contaminated sediments, harmful algal blooms, environmental monitoring and restoration, contaminant fate and transport, and environmental assessment. Over the past 30 years since I've known Rick, much of that work was focused on Muskegon Lake. So Rick is well acquainted with the wide variety of environmental conditions in and around Muskegon Lake and its watershed. Dr. Rediske is currently providing technical and leadership support for communities with water supplies impacted by PFAS, and he is part of the PFAS Citizens Advisory Work Group for the state of Michigan. He has a PhD degree in environmental health sciences and toxicology from the University of Michigan. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity, and there's a lot of interest. There's a big turnout for the meeting, so I'm going to do a few background slides on PFAS and then get right into the foam issue. So let me share here.
And while you're sharing, I think we wanted to tell everybody to put their questions, save their questions to the end and put them in the chat. I'll monitor those at the end. And if you can't use the chat, raise your hand and I'll try to answer you that way.
Okay. So I'm going to be talking about the PFAS foam formation in Muskegon Lake. And PFAS is a very important issue right now, and it stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. And when I first started talking about PFAS to people, there was about 1,000 chemicals that were talked about, and now we're up to 9,000. So there's a lot of proprietary chemicals, a lot of chemicals that we have no idea what the formulas are. And this PFAS issue is related to the use of chemicals that were developed in the 50s. And they were developed primarily with the atomic bomb program. They needed something that was resistant in the process of making enriched uranium, and the fluorinated polymers were the only materials that could make that production possible. They're resistant to oil, water, and grease, so they repel oil, water, and grease. A lot of times, it'll repel oil, but it won't repel water, etc. But this is pretty much a universal repellent as far as treating surfaces. It's a surfactant, and it's also used for fire suppression. The chemicals are persistent, mobile, and bioaccumulative. And we've had an emergence of short chains. Up at the top here, you can see the PFOS and PFOA. These are the ones that we're primarily concerned about, the 8-chain. And we've had a whole bunch of other smaller chain compounds that came out after these 8-chain varieties. And they haven't been well studied either, but they seem to have the same effect as the longer chains. It's just they're not bioaccumulative. So the Gen X is the one that's causing all the problems down in Cape Fear. That's the Chemours facility down there. And as far as the uses of PFAS, it's gotten put into all sorts of products that we use every day. And when you look at the label, like if you look at a can of paint, you may not see PFAS listed, but because it's a water-based paint, PFAS has some good uses for that, and I'll get into different things about that. But one of the primary ways that we get PFAS into our body is with personal care products. And again, they're not necessarily listed on the labels when you buy them, but dental floss. My teeth are pretty close together, so I have to have strong dental floss. The dental floss ribbon works really good for me, but that was the one that had the most PFAS in it. So PFAS was put in to help glide, so it wouldn't stick to your teeth. And then, we have the Scotch Guard. That's a common treatment for stain resistant for carpets and Stainmaster carpets, Scotchgard going on all sorts of leather goods. The Hush Puppy shoes in Rockford, the Scotchgard was used there. Gore-Tex fabric. And then I mentioned paints a little bit ago. The PFAS in paints helps the paint spread, apply evenly, and it also helps make the paint stain resistant so you don't get fingerprints on it. So, all the latex paint that we buy and we start washing the brushes off, whatever PFAS is in that, paint gets down the drain. Simonized car wax, everybody, I see a lot of older people there. Remember the Simonized car wax, the water beads up. That's really high in PFAS. And car waxers have one of the highest blood levels of PFAS exposure. So car wax has it, and ski wax. A lot of the ski resorts are contaminated with PFAS just because the ski wax contains PFAS, and people are skiing and it gets off into the into the snow and gets into the water. Teflon pans, that's one of the common uses. It's also found in pesticides and herbicides, usually as a dispersant. And lately we found out that it's an impurity in containers. So there was a process developed by Ford Motor Company to put fluorine gas inside polyethylene. And that's how they made the gas tanks. The old style gas tanks would always rust and leak. And the new polyethylene gas tanks, they would fill that up with fluorine and they would create like a fluorinated inside of it. But it turns out that material leaches PFAS compounds into the pesticides. So there's a whole bunch of containers out there that that have oils and other things in that you want to be chemical resistant, but they're leaching PFAS into them. And then finally, the AFFF foam that's used as a fire suppressant and also at airports. One thing to keep in mind is that lithium-ion batteries have PFAS-based electrolytes, and semiconductors use PFAS as surfactants to help clean the parts. And then when you assemble the chips, there's a little bit of a PFAS coating on there. So a lot of the businesses that we're trying to attract and build capacity for chips and lithium-ion batteries in the United States, those are PFAS-related products, and we really need to know what the industries are using. I don't want to see the same mistakes 30 years from now where we have a whole bunch of batteries that have been disposed of and that's causing a problem. So something to be aware of. Where can we find PFAS sites? There was a study a couple of years ago, and they've identified 57,412. That's a strange number, but there's probably at least 3 times more than that. But these are major sites that they're just identifying, and it could be industrial facilities, airports. Airports are very common for the fire protection. Military sites and wastewater treatment plants. We have 294 PFAS sites. I hope that's correct. I know it goes up every week. Last time I checked, it was 294 sites in Michigan. And the thing we have to remember about wastewater treatment is it doesn't treat PFAS. The wastewater treatment's really good for taking out organic matter and then precipitating things out, but PFAS will pass right through, or it'll accumulate in the biosolids, and then the biosolids are applied to farmland. And wastewater treatment plants also accept landfill leachate, so that's another way that you can get PFAS into wastewater plants. So there's sites all over the United States that contain PFAS. If you look at the MPART website, maybe Abby can explain that a little bit later, but there's a whole bunch of information about all the PFAS sites in Michigan, and the map of Michigan, has a bunch of dots on it. It's not because we're necessarily any different than other states. It's just we've been investigating it very judiciously ever since, I guess, 2019. But PFAS sites are all over the place, and they're all over the place because it's been used in so many different types of products. The reason why I'm concerned about PFAS, I'll go through there's about 6 different parameters that raise a lot of red flags for me. First, it's water soluble. Most of the common contaminants like PCBs and pesticides, mercury, lead, those are all very water insoluble, but PFAS is water soluble. So it dissolves in water and spreads to a much greater extent than a lot of the contaminants that we've been dealing with in the past. It bioaccumulates in both plants and animals. So a lot of times, certain chemicals will accumulate more in plants or animals, but this one accumulates in both. It's not biodegradable. They're called forever chemicals. And the carbon-fluorine bond is the fourth strongest bond in nature. It takes a lot of energy to put that molecule together. And none of the physical chemical processes like UV degradation or oxidation reduction, none of those processes really touch the PFAS, and we haven't been able to come up with microbes that efficiently degrade PFAS. So they're essentially forever chemicals. And one of the real concerns about PFAS is that it binds to proteins and DNA, and it circulates in the blood bound to albumin. And every time I show this picture, I'm so glad that I took my biochemistry and I learned molecules that were balls and sticks. Molecules are really complicated and folded all over the place. And this is what albumin looks like. I don't know if you're familiar with albumin, but when you go to the doctor and get a physical exam, you want to see a lot of albumin in your blood. That's the major protein in your body that is used for energy. And you don't want to see albumin in your urine because our kidneys filter that out. And I'll get into why that's important. But chemicals that bind to albumin have an instant access to our cells because albumin is food and energy. And when the cell is dividing, when a cell is producing hormones or other chemicals, proteins in our body, it has to have energy. So albumin is what is used to carry important biomolecules into our cells. So antibodies are in there, hormones are in there, and PFAS is in there also. So, things like lead accumulate in our bones, mercury accumulates in our muscles, and, PFAS and pesticides go into our fatty tissue. This one circulates in our blood. So that really sets it apart as being, a chemical of concern. And I mentioned the albumin, the C8, the 8 carbon chain PFAS, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, but the ones that we have in Muskegon Lake, the PFOA and PFOS, those are the 8 chain PFAS compounds, and those are reabsorbed. The kidneys will filter out the albumin and we will reabsorb the PFAS that's attached to that. So we have a 4 to 9 year half-life for these particular compounds. And the other animal species that we typically use to do toxicity studies like rabbits and mice, they excrete PFAS within 24 hours. So the humans are different and we retain it longer. So, if you dose a rat and they don't have any effect, if you dose a human, we could have an effect because it accumulates in our body. So we really don't have good ways to test animals and then draw conclusions about what's happening in humans. The toxic effects are additive. The PFAS is competing for sites on albumin, so it doesn't necessarily matter which type of PFAS it is. So the toxic effects are additive. And even some of the new MCLs that the EPA put out, they have a toxicity index where they sum up certain of the PFAS compounds. So they are additive. They're not single toxicants. And then finally, we're dealing with historical releases over decades involving human exposure, multiple generations and life stages. So there's a lot of history to overcome, and we've seen this in Rockford, especially with long-term exposures to these compounds before people are notified or people realize there's contamination at a site. In terms of the health effects, it's got a broad association with certain health issues. And when I say association, it just means that if you have levels of PFAS, you're more likely to have some of these conditions. And it's not like lead or mercury, where if you have a certain level in your body, there is toxicity associated with it. It's just there's a broad association with PFAS exposure and these different health issues. The first one's elevated cholesterol, low birth weight, the antibody response to vaccines is lower, kidney, prostate, ovarian, testicular cancer, pregnancy-induced hypertension, changes in the liver, delayed puberty, decreased fertility, and then thyroid disruption. And what also adds to the issue with PFAS is because it circulates in your blood that the exposure factors are really critical, like the concentration, the stage of development, the frequency, individual factors like your genetic predisposition or presuppositions to different diseases, and then your health care and your health status and your ability to have safe water. So it has really broad potential impacts. And again, it's association, not necessarily a concentration-dependent toxicity. And moving on into the foam, I've got a picture of the Eagle foam sign here so you can take a look at it. And there's a lot of information on there, and that's a really good summary of the hazards associated with PFAS. PFAS foam, the concentration of PFOA and PFOS in the foam can be very high. And I can speak for the foam at the Rockford Dam. It's 220,000 parts per trillion, so it's much higher than we had about 4,000 in Muskegon. But the foams can be really, really high, and it's not expressed as the concentration in the foam. So the foam isn't really 250,000 parts per trillion. It's the collapsed water in the foam. So when you have foam and you let it set, the foam will collapse into water, and then the water is analyzed. So that's what these numbers are expressed as, and that's what we have to consider when we look at the exposure issues with that. So the PFAS in the foam is not absorbed through the skin. You can wash it off easily. And that's what we encourage anybody that contacts the foam. They should wash it off. Pets are certainly more susceptible because, the dogs will lick their fur. So you want to make sure that if you have a dog and it goes into the water, that you wash it off after that. Touching the water is not a concern, but the foam that you see from PFAS is bright white, and it piles up like shaving cream. It's sticky, and you can throw it into the air and it'll kind of float. So it's a bright white foam, and the main thing to remember is that you should wash off if you contact it. And I'm sure people aren't necessarily interested in all the molecules and things like that, but this is what PFOS looks like, PFOS, and this is the one that was in the foam. This is a common PFAS compound. It's the one that's primarily in Scotchgard, but it can be in other materials. But the PFAS molecule has what we call a hydrophilic head, and that is a part of the molecule that dissolves in water. And then it also has another part of the molecule, which is called hydrophobic or oleophobic oil-hating and water-hating tail, and that sticks out of the water. So that's what repels it. So there's part of the molecule that will dissolve in water, and there's another part that will not, and that's what repels the oils and makes it stain resistant. So when you put PFAS in water, the water-soluble head will dissolve in water, and then the chain will go up into the air. So looks like little springs sticking in the water, but you can have a one molecule thick layer of PFAS floating on the surface of the water. when you have waves and turbulence, that forces the PFAS to contact itself. So you've got this layer floating on the surface of the water, and then when you have waves or going over a dam, the molecules will contact each other, and PFAS does stick to itself. So what happens is you get what we call a micelle, and that's the science term for a soap bubble. And the inside of the bubble is just air where the chains are sticking out, and then the outside of that is wet. So anytime you have disturbances of the water, and that could be rapids in a stream, it could be like if you have a stream and a tree sticking out, there's turbulence around the stream, a dam, or in the case of Muskegon Lake, we have just the gentle lapping of water. There's tides and things like that. So this movement of water over and over each other will cause these PFAS molecules that are sticking upright into the air to form the soap bubbles. So that's kind of an explanation of how PFAS foams occurs in surface water environments. And just a brief tour around the lake. This year, the water sports park that's in North Muskegon. Renee Tardani from the Institute, she's involved with our beach monitoring program, and she took some pictures at the water sports park, and you can actually see some PFAS off in the distance floating in the water, just kind of a line like was described what they were seeing in the Bluffton area. You can see some PFAS out here. Bluffton Bay Marina had a mix of cyanobacteria and PFAS. You can see the white foam, and then you can see some of the green cyanobacteria. I don't know which one's going to win out, but you can see smaller amounts of cyanobacteria and foam, and then it gradually, as it gets near the dock here, it accumulates into a foam layer. This is the Grand Trunk boat launch. Mike Haslett from the Institute took this. And Renee took a picture at Harbortown Beach. You can see the shaving cream-like foam forming. Dr. Steinman took a picture right outside the Institute. This is 6th Street. You can see foam accumulating along the rocks, and then you can see the foam out into the water. And then Kate Linus took this picture down by the gazebo near the old marathon site. This is on the Lakeshore Bike Trail. You can see PFAS really accumulating into, like just mounds of foam. And then she also got 2 really good pictures of PFAS coming across the lake in sort of like lines. So there's PFAS being formed in the shore, and there's also PFAS coming across the lake and congregating or accumulating. In Rockford, I mentioned that we have the foam on the dam, and if you do a little mathematics, the discharge of the Rogue River at this particular dam is about 244 cubic feet per second, or 6,899 liters per second, and water at 10 parts per trillion. If you remember Avogadro's number from from high school chemistry or whatever, there's still a lot of molecules even in a small amount. There's 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd molecules in a mole of PFAS, and when you calculate out how many moles are in 10 parts per trillion, there's 12 trillion molecules in a concentration that dilute. And when you have 12 trillion molecules going over the dam at 6,899 liters per second, you wind up with this foam being created. So that's the best explanation I can give you for why the foam is occurring. And we don't have measurable concentrations, or the concentrations are much lower than 10 parts per trillion in Muskegon Lake. Yet because of the contact and the circulation pattern, we get the foam being produced. So we have the wave action in the open water and on the shoreline, so that helps produce the foam. Muskegon Lake has a complex shoreline, and it's prone to the accumulation of surface scum from halves. So we've had a number of halves issues, and they always seem to be accumulating at certain spots in the lake, like Hartshorn Marina and some of the other water sports parks. And that's because of just the shoreline morphology of the lake. It's got numerous known and potential PFAS sites. None of them are like the Rockford site, but we do have sites here. And we have complex hydrodynamics, and I want to talk a little bit about that on the next couple slides. And we have the Muskegon River pushing the water, through the lake and out the channel. We have Bear Lake pushing water in. And then we have the Lake Michigan Channel, and the Lake Michigan Channel can go both ways, and we'll see that in a minute. And then we had this study by Eagle, and they did I think a complete watershed study. This is the area of Muskegon Lake, and this was presented at one of the past meetings. And you can see we had a couple samples above the water quality standard. The water quality standard is 12, but all the samples on the lake or really near the lake were below. Some of them were not detectable or 1 or 2 parts per trillion. So this is kind of the current status of the water concentrations from 2022. There was a tour on our boat, and Eagle, Abby and a couple other people from Eagle went on the Jackson and had a tour of the different sites, and they put together this map. I've added to it, but as far as potential PFAS sites or PFAS sites, we have the SAPI paper. I don't think Grand Trunk Dock has ever been investigated. Ruddiman Creek outfall from the Eagle study has PFAS in it. I don't know if the Amoco terminal has ever been investigated, but oil terminals typically have PFAS fire suppression built in. And, when they tore the terminal down, who knows if they were really careful with whatever PFAS materials might have been in the fire suppression systems for this site. And then we have the Adelaide Point area, which is foundries, several different foundries that were located there. And then Michigan Steel, Westran, different companies were located at this particular site. I don't know what kind of PFAS testing was done there. We have a Teledyne motor site up here, Lakey Foundry. There's also a Teledyne vehicle site on 4 Mile Creek, which is up here. The Mosquito Creek, Muskegon wastewater system, that's a PFAS site that comes down the South Branch, so that comes in here. We have the Marathon Tank Farm and the Napsol Zephyr Refinery up the main branch of the Muskegon River, and then up in Bear Lake watershed, we have Northside Landfill and the BASF site. So there's lots of different sites, and one thing to remember is that you can have one big site, or you can have many small sites, but it's putting PFAS into Muskegon Lake, and you still get that potential for foam formation because it forms a surface layer. And then I wanted to spend a little time on the circulation pattern. We used to have a buoy in Muskegon Lake, and that buoy would be out, I think, like April through October or September, and we would monitor the water quality in the lake. The buoy also had meteorological stations and Doppler flow meters in it and things like that. So we had a good understanding of water quality and what was happening in the lake with the buoy. And Bopi Badanda's lab at AWRI developed a hydrodynamic model of Muskegon Lake. And when you look at Muskegon Lake, you've got 2 channels that flow through it, one from Bear Lake, and that flows this direction. Then you've got another channel through the center, and that's the deepest spot in the lake, and that's the Muskegon River, the old Muskegon River channel, and then Bear Lake, the old Bear Lake channel. So we've got some interesting morphology at the bottom. The bathymetry of Muskegon Lake is pretty complicated with these 2 basins within the big basin of Muskegon Lake. And when they were running the buoy in 2016, there was a major cold water intrusion event where Lake Michigan water came into Muskegon Lake. And this happens quite frequently. This was a pretty dramatic event. They don't happen like this all the time, but they were able to track this, and then they were able to construct a model to look at the entire lake just from looking at a few different points. But in August, the lake was really warm, 23 degrees centigrade, and it was pretty much isothermal throughout the whole lake. And then on September 2nd, you can see that the Lake Michigan turned really cold. There was a strong upwelling, and it was pushing the cold water into Muskegon Lake. So Muskegon Lake on the 31st was flowing from the river all the way out to the channel. There is some, mixing dynamics in the lake, but it was pretty much, a flow going through the lake. It takes about 1 month for the water to pass through Muskegon Lake. But when that cold water intrusion event occurred, you can see the cold water coming in, and it's going up the Bear Lake channel. And then 2 days later, you can see it start coming up the Muskegon River channel. So what that's doing is it's taking any water that's in Muskegon Lake, and it's pushing it in the opposite direction. So the reason why this is important for PFAS is that you've got a pattern that's pushing the water, directly out the channel, but then you can also have flow patterns that's pushing it back up along the shoreline. And that's why it's really hard to say, where's the PFAS coming from? I mean, we have these sites, but we have, it's not something that you can say, well, this is upstream or downstream, because up and downstream can vary depending on the wind conditions. And you can just see how long that lasted. You could still see the effects for 10 days after that cold water intrusion. So this is something to really be cognizant of, because let me go back to the map here. We know that there's PFAS at sappy paper, and the standard flow pattern of the lake might cause it to accumulate here, but because of that cold water intrusion, it can be pushed up into the lake in the opposite direction. So, and I'm not picking on sappy paper, because Ruddiman Creek, the outfall there could be the same way. Normally it would flow out into the river and then go out into the lake and then out the channel. But during one of those cold events, it's pushing it, back up in this direction. So, complex flow patterns. So that's all I can say about that. I do want to go over some fish data, and I just got this afternoon, so I was able to put it in my slide. But fish are really good indicators of the health of the lake, and there was some fish collections done in 2023 and 2022, and you can see that there is PFOS that was detected in the fish in Muskegon Lake. I've got the criteria that MDHHS uses for the setting of fish consumption advisories, and less than 9 parts per trillion, 9 ppb is the cutoff for a fishing advisory. So for all of these fish except the yellow perch, there wouldn't be a PFAS advisory for PFOS in Muskegon Lake. It's low enough. And I've got the fishing advisory from the Eat Safe Fish Guidelines here. So for all other species, it's less than 6 meals per year, and that's because of PCBs. That's the current fishing advisory for Muskegon Lake, and you can see that we've got 15, 16, and 21, and that kind of fits into the the 6 meals per year is between 150 and 300 ppb. So we're much lower than that, and we're in the range of 8 to 4. If you were just considering PFAS, we're in the range of 8 to 4 meals per month. But there's already an advisory for 6 meals per year because of PCBs in the water. So The fish do not show that there is a PFOS problem in Muskegon Lake. So these were collected in 2023 and 2022. So if something strange happened and there's more PFAS in the water in 2024, we don't know that. But up until 2023, the results do show that in the fish show that there's really not too much of a problem with fish consumption. So some potential next steps, if there's more foam events, the question that we have is the 2024 foam event from increased PFAS concentrations or unusual meteorological conditions? I mean, there's two possibilities. It could be both, but one way to determine that is to look at the meteorological conditions and see if they compare to previous years. Those studies that were done to make the hydrodynamic model went into analyzing wind direction. There's a real detailed meteorological analysis that was done for like 10 to 15 years worth of met data. So you could compare the current data to the past data and see whether that's the case. I did speak with Mike Jury from MPART, and he said there's more reports of foam this year than ever before. So there might be something going on statewide, and that could be temperature, meteorology, or it could just be the fact that more people are aware of it and reporting it. So we don't know, but the meteorology is really an important factor, and you can see by that circulation pattern how that can all play into the formation of foam. If we get foam next year, or if the foam comes back, I know most of the foam was dispersed from when we had the big rain last week, but if we see it coming back, it might be a good idea to repeat the 2022 study of Muskegon Lake to determine if the levels have increased. We have a kind of a baseline, and it'd be good to look at that and see, repeat that study and see if there's changes in the concentrations. We can collect another set of fish samples to see if they're comparable. The fish really accumulate the material fast, and we've noticed from like the Huron River that the levels, do go down after the PFAS source is taken away, but they do go up pretty quickly when there's a PFAS source present. And then finally, it'd be good to review the status of all the 201 sites around the lake, and especially areas that have heavy construction, to determine if we have PFAS data available for those particular sites. So, we don't have an answer, and to track it down, it's going to take a while to figure out why it's forming. But I think looking at the meteorological data is important. And then if we start getting repeat foam events like we just had, start trying to look at, has the PFAS levels in Muskegon Lake changed? Do we see a change in the fish? And then start looking on the shore for just changes or new sites that we're not aware of. So that kind of ends my study or my presentation, and I will open things up to questions. So.
Okay, so I think what we'll do is first we'll go through the questions that were in the chat, and I think Fallon is ready to kind of go through those, and then we'll open it up.
Okay.
Yep, I'll start with the first. Well, first, Abby answered somebody's question about filtering PFAS out of their water at home. So there's an NPART website link in there, and we can share that, maybe share all these links on Facebook as well later or something.
Yeah, I wondered, Fallon, if I could just take 2 minutes and show people the MPART in case they're not familiar, because a lot of this information is on our website and it's pretty easy to find. If
I think Rick will need to stop sharing for you to share, but if he can do that, then you can.
Okay.
While Abby's pulling that up, I'll keep going.
All right, somebody's got to allow me to share. I think I've got to be promoted from a guest to a host or something.
I think I just need Rick to stop sharing.
I thought I stopped.
I still here. I think I can stop you. There
Okay.
you go. Try now, Abby.
Okay, perfect. Screen 2. Okay, real quick, in case people have not seen our MPART website, if you just type in MPART into your Google browser, it should come up. But we've got a ton of information on here, and including a whole bunch of resources for residents. But one of the things I wanted to show you was we have a GIS map that you can get into. It will show you, if I can get it to, well, here, I'll just do this. It'll come up and it'll show you surface water concentrations, drinking water concentrations, fish concentrations for everything in your area, as well as some of the PFAS sites in your area. And so this is a great way to zoom in and around the Muskegon Lake area and see what's going on. And so, like I said, here, we'll just give it a second for this. If you haven't used it, it's pretty easy. Along the side, you'll see the PFAS sites are in purple. The surface water sampling is all the green dots, all the fish. And this is all fish. So some of them don't have PFAS results because this is all the PCB results, all the mercury results, all the fish results for the state. And if we zoom in a little bit, sorry, we'll just give it a second. There we go. You can see that we've got lots of stuff going around Muskegon. These hexabins here are all of the municipal water. So somebody was asking about drinking water results. If you click in here, it'll tell you that you can see there's all the compliance monitoring for Muskegon drinking water for all their state sampling. So it's all right there. Same thing if you want to turn that off, just because it's kind of it gets messy. You can see all of the green dots are the here's a sample for Ryerson Creek. And again, you can look at all of the different sampling results as well as any of the laboratory flags. So, and there will be in some cases some multiple samples. So you just want to tab through, and same thing with the fish. So this is a great way to just, you know, if you want to really dig into the data or dig into what's in your area. Obviously there's lots of sites, including the SAPI one. You click on any of these, it'll take you to the facility, who's in charge of that facility, and it'll give you, if you go to more info, you can open it up and it will take you to the web page specifically for that site with the background and maps usually to go with it and some anticipated activities. So at least you can call the project manager and talk to them about, you know, potentially any of your questions. So just wanted to throw that out there before we start going through questions. All right, Fallon, why don't we go ahead and go through the questions?
Okay, so there were quite a few questions about locations and amount of PFAS in the lake, but I think Rick answered those after they got in. If there's still additional questions on exact sites, feel free to resubmit a question. There was a question about the connection between PFAS foam and the harmful algal blooms that could those be connected, climate input?
Well, I don't, they're not connected, but the same physical processes that produce the cyanobacteria blooms will produce PFAS foam. So the cyanobacteria blooms, the cyanobacteria float to the surface and then they get blown into the nearshore area, and that creates the scum. And with PFAS, you know, we have the molecules potentially floating at the surface, and then they form the foam layer, and that gets blown into the surface or blown into the shoreline. So, you know, the same mechanism will produce both of them, but cyanobacteria is totally different than the PFAS. So,
okay. Do we know what PFAS levels are in our tap water, municipal tap water?
The Muskegon gets its water from from Lake Michigan, and the PFAS levels in the tap water at Grand Rapids range between 2 to 3 parts per trillion. I would imagine that'd be pretty similar to what's in Muskegon.
Yeah, that's what the website said, the
Yeah.
sampling things that are about 3. Mhm.
Okay. Should the city and townships provide warning signage about this?
That'd be something for the public health department to look into. But if you have areas that have persistent foam accumulations, it would be good to have a sign up. And we have signs up in Rockford, and I know there's signs up in like Benetton Lake at certain places. So that's something that you can work with MDHHS on. I don't know who pays for the signs or how do they get the signs, but I know the state has signs. So
Usually working through local health for that.
Yeah.
So especially if it's I mean, we would look at areas where the public is actually going to be recreating. But we don't, usually we'll put those signs up in cases where there's very, very high levels of PFAS foam. But that's definitely something we can talk about.
Okay. Are the NPDES discharge permits including PFAS as parameters for industry and construction sites that discharge stormwater construction and non-constant cooling water into the storm drain systems?
I'm pretty sure that, well, I know that MPART has done a whole survey of wastewater systems. I know Muskegon wastewater does have PFAS in their effluent.
That's not the question though. The question is NPDES dischargers. For example, stormwater and non-contact cooling water goes right into our storm drain system from facilities that are far off the shoreline itself and that are not wastewater treatment plants or landfills. And I'm wondering if, as they update their NPDES discharge parameters, if the state of Michigan is beginning to include the PFAS since it's so ubiquitous and not just the normal parameters.
Yeah, as those permits are coming up for renewal, Kathy, they're being evaluated for PFAS. I know there are many NPDES permits that now include PFAS parameters, and we're kind of systematically going through to evaluate those that probably are the highest potential for PFAS and then working our way down through. So I won't say that all of them include PFAS or all of them have been evaluated, but most of the, industries that we would expect to see PFAS have been evaluated, your platers, a lot of your industries that would be using PFAS. We've looked at it and had them do short-term stormwater characterizations and then rolled in these, if they're doing any kind of NPDES permits, we're also asking them to include those. So yes.
Okay, what about the high levels in the yellow perch? In that fish study, what are the prohibitions?
God, I didn't catch the last part of the question.
Should there be extra concerns about yellow perch because of the higher levels?
Well, there's a fishing advisory for 6 meals a year for yellow perch. And the PFAS would not cause it to be lower. So, I tell people that, especially because I'm dealing with people in Rockford a lot, that, they should look at those PFAS numbers, and you may not want to eat fish if you've already got a high blood level or something. So, I would not hesitate to eat yellow perch. I like to eat yellow perch, and I will judiciously try to have less than six meals a year, but I don't see an issue with consuming just following the guidelines. I think is what's important. So as long as you eat less than 6 meals a year, I think you're fine, or eat 6 meals a year or less.
Okay.
If from the health department, we want to chime in on that too.
Yeah, I could just chime in really quick.
So when we test fish, we test them for more than just PFAS. We're also testing fish for mercury, and then depending on the water body that those fish are coming from, we're testing them for other contaminants. So fish from Muskegon Lake are also tested for PCBs, and right now it's the PCBs that are really driving the guidelines for most of the species that come out of Muskegon Lake, with mercury being the other chemical of concern that's driving those advisories and guidelines. So while there is some PFAS in the fish, the levels of PFAS, is not as much of a concern as the PCBs and or mercury.
Thank you. Is there information on the old Part 307 sites? Was that the other link that Abby put in the chat?
No, I didn't put that one in the chat, but I can show you real quick. The old 307 sites have all been converted over to Part 201 sites, and they are, unless we've got a different thing, they're now displayed on what we're calling the RIDE mapper. And so it's specifically got your 211 sites, your 213 sites, and your 201 sites. It's also got some Superfund sites as well. So these brown dots are all what we would consider in some cases, the old 307 sites, as well as anything that's come along since then. So, and these are all, again, I believe these are clickable. So these are all clickable to tell you, what the concern is and what the name of the site, and if you want to get additional information. So I can drop this in the chat as well, so that people can, if they again want to tool through the data that we've got. The other thing is we are starting to put some of these files into RIDE. And so if you get into RIDE, there is a way to actually look at some of the file material right in RIDE. We're trying to get all of our electronic data and files for the 201 sites into RIDE, so that, eventually the goal is to get rid of FOIA, so that you don't have to ask us for the data. You can actually just download it yourself and get it. So that's one of those goals that we've always dreamed about. And you too, I'm sure.
Thank you. What drives Eagle to do more testing in consecutive years?
Is that for what kind of testing? Are we talking fish testing, or are we talking surface water testing?
The question did not say, but I would guess surface water testing.
It's going to depend on a variety of things. We're going to continue to watch what we know about, activity at the 201 sites. If we've got manufacturers in the area who may have high discharges, if we've got alarming amounts of PFAS in water bodies that's really unaccounted for, if we've got a fish result that doesn't make any sense for what we're seeing in conjunction with the rest of the data in the area. So, and then there's always this, the cyclical monitoring that goes on throughout the state. There's compliance monitoring, but then there's also just the general, every 5 years, our surface water program goes and tries to do different parts of the state so that everything gets sampled at least every 5 years. So PFAS has upped that a lot. We've got a ton of PFAS surface water sampling that's going on, as well as I think we did over 1,500 different fish last year for PFAS sampling and monitoring as well. But, foam by itself is not a great indicator of contamination, because it takes so little foam to generate, or it takes so little PFAS to generate foam that there's not always, like Rick said, there's not a good correlation between the surface water concentrations and the actual foam concentrations. They don't really make any sense. Rick's talked about Rockford. The Rockford concentrations of surface water there are not very high, but they have enormous amounts of PFAS in their foam. So they don't always correlate very well. And so we don't we don't look at doing additional monitoring just based on foam results or the occurrence of foam. And as Rick said, we have been getting a lot of foam complaints this year, and I'm not just sure if it's just because it's, we had less rain, or we had, hotter, drier summer, or what it was.
Okay, that kind of leads, the amount of foam leads into this next question. They were saying a lot of foam. It seems like there's a lot of PFAS, but their second part was, can we guesstimate how much PFAS generally is in Muskegon Lake?
No, I don't think we can guesstimate how much PFAS is in the lake.
Yeah.
I think like Rick said, the fish are a great indicator of the overall PFAS concentration of the lake. You want to expand on that again, Rick?
Yeah, the fish will bioaccumulate PFAS, and the PFOS is one of the few PFAS related compounds that does bioaccumulate. So if we had high levels in the fish, that would indicate high levels in the ambient lake. But no, we haven't done a survey of PFAS in the open water. They've just taken samples along the shoreline.
Okay. Is PFAS in the sediment, and does the current development activities on the lake cause PFAS to be released?
PFAS does accumulate in sediment, but it's not like some of the other pollutants like heavy metals and PCBs and things like that will be 1,000 times higher than the water. I mean, you do get some accumulating in the sediment, but not very much. So it'd be really, the construction would be disturbing sediment, and then the water that's trapped in the sediment would be going out into the open water. So I think we need more information before we try and just say it's construction activities or other sites. The big thing to see is whether this widespread foaming occurs next month or next year. So
okay. Are many residents getting their drinking water from wells, and should the wells be tested for PFAS?
I think everybody around Muskegon Lake's on city water. So again, the city water's checked probably 4 times a year, if not more often.
What is a good method for a watershed group to use a prioritized actions needed to address sources and causes of ongoing PFAS discharge to Muskegon Lake?
Well, I think you saw the ride map. You really have to start looking at the individual sites and determine whether there's PFAS there, and then what's the concentration, how much groundwater is seeping in. Is there a really strong gradient, or is it a slow gradient? So you'd really have to spend time and do an inventory of the different sources.
I want to just follow up with that. That was my question, because I think it would be a good idea for the Muskegon Lake Watershed Partnership to take a look and then prioritize based on some criteria, human health and other criteria. So figuring out how to do that, and for a volunteer group with some experts on our group, maybe we could begin that process at least. I don't know with the MPART citizen advisory groups, if we can somehow collaborate with those types of work groups, the groundwater group, which focuses more on the sources, the surface water group that focuses more on the fish in the water column. If there's some way to make sense of the existing data, and then with historic and local knowledge, kind of put things together and maybe somehow prioritize where we locally feel there should be more action of some sort.
The other thing I would say, some collaboration with EPA, now that they're really incorporating PFAS a lot into many different aspects of the EPA program. So yeah, I think there's ways that we can collaborate on that too.
Yeah, and example would be the Amoco tank farm. There's obviously monitor wells there. Maybe there's a lot of them were when the site was decommissioned and cleaned up. There's probably a few monitor wells left, but the question is, has that site been monitored for PFAS? I don't know if it has or not, but you may want to request that site be monitored for PFAS if it hasn't been. And that's really close to where one of the foam areas, and I think you'd have good justification to request that monitoring. Whether Amoco would do it or whoever owns it, that's another question. But I think it behooves everybody in the watershed partnership to look at those individual sites, and is there any information available? If there's no information available, then I would have priorities. The tank farm with a fire suppression system, could be a moderately high level site. There could be other sites like a marina or something. That's probably a low level possibility. So I think you just have to look at all the sites around. And again, I unfortunately the quote in the paper, but I've been coming to Muskegon for 23 years. We've been monitoring the beaches all that time, and I've got people that go out and look at the lake, and I get people that call me when there's a algae scum, and I've never been called about the PFAS foam. So I think this is a unusual year, and the question is there something meteorologically that caused it? I think that's a really important question. And we do have all that data that was put together for that hydrodynamic model, so you could easily determine whether the weather was different. We had a lot of dry weather. We had a very dry summer, and we've had rip current warnings on Lake Michigan every day almost. So there's some unusual meteorology right off the bat, but is that enough to cause the foam? Who knows? So I think if it happens again, then you really need to start looking.
So the other thing I'm going to put in the chat is how to submit a foam complaint to Eagle, because we're not going to necessarily go out and sample these, but we do want to know about them. And there's a way for you to submit pictures of the foam complaints as well, because if we're getting a ton of foam complaints for one water body, then that obviously indicates that something's changed or something else is going on. And we would like to know about that. So we're trying to get people to submit those complaints so we can map them on the GIS layers for our water resources staff, so that they can go out and take a look at those. So that's something else that I wanted to make sure that you guys knew about, that there is that foam complaint link out there to go in and submit your pictures and your complaints.
Is there a link between this and climate change?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
Well,
I think there might be, because again, you've got more frequent and intense storms as one of the the symptoms of climate change, and that could cause more foam to be produced from the wave events. And also temperatures affect the surface tension of water. So a lot of times hot water foams a little more than cold water. So maybe there's a temperature issue with the water temperature, who knows? But I think climate could definitely be part of increasing foam events around the state, just because of the wind and the physical factors and even temperature. So.
Okay. There was a question, is it true that not all foam on the lake includes PFAS? Somebody did answer that this is true, but those other causes are normally not the bright white color. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, that's pretty much how you differentiate. And another way is to put a stick in there, and if you can break the foam apart and it doesn't, stick on the stick, it's not PFAS foam, because there is foam like at Quantum Falls. I mean, that's the iconic foam, and it's usually brown color because it picks up the organic matter. Because organic matter does dissolve in detergent or that kind of foam. So the foam on Muskegon Lake is white, bright white, and it looks like PFAS foam, and the one sample did have PFAS in it. So.
Mhm. Mhm. And we'd really like people to just treat it like it's, got some PFAS in it, just because ultimately we don't want people playing in the foam, even if it's naturally occurring, it's full of bacteria and microbes and stuff. You're not going to want to be playing in that stuff. So the health recommendations are always the same. If you come into contact with foam, make sure you wash your dog, obviously don't play in the foam and then go have your sandwich or something like that. You want to take care to get all those microbes and other chemicals off your hands.
Okay, that's a great lead into the next question. There's been a lot of mention about this being covered in the TV and the local news, but how do we inform the public not to come in contact with it?
Well, I think that's where the signage would come in handy. And I don't know if Public Health Muskegon has put up any signs for the cyanobacteria, scums that are wash up along the shoreline. But, we do have the cyanobacteria contact issues, and I think you could, have a sign that does both foam, warns against foam and cyanobacteria would be a good idea.
How will Eagle make sure all new waterfront developments do not inadvertently make PFAS available to the lake?
Great question, Kate. I think that ultimately, yeah, she's laughing in the background. Ultimately, we want to do our big concern here, the foam is a symptom, right, of a bigger issue of PFAS that is getting into the lake. And so all of those historic industrial areas along the lake, we would like to be able to do source control. And so I don't know if they can inadvertently make PFAS available. Obviously, if groundwater is seeping into the surface water, I'm not sure that they can do anything to make it worse, but
what I meant, Abby, was
yeah.
Say you're excavating adjacent to the lake and you're digging deeper to get your marina ready. And so you're digging up sediment, even though you're trying to manage it properly and all that kind of stuff as you're bringing it out, you're exposing a whole bunch of potentially contaminated soil, everything to water that wasn't there. That's what I meant. I was trying to find a shortcut way to say all of that. And that's what I meant.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think, that would have to be done through the permitting process to make sure that whatever they're actually doing along the waterfront, it takes it into consideration, those kinds of contingencies.
There's a couple questions about if there's any current remediation efforts or practices.
Well, there's the only really good method for cleaning up groundwater right now is pump and treat with activated carbon. And I'm not aware of any, groundwater treatment systems that have been installed at any of these sites. So.
Yeah, I don't think so. There are some treatment technologies out there that are being in the pilot phase that look promising, but at this point, there's nothing that's easy. There's no easy way to keep it out without, doing some sort of mechanical pump and treat, like Rick said, that would actually keep the groundwater from seeping into the surface water.
Okay, the sites that have not been tested show on the map. How do we get them tested to find out if they have PFAS?
We will have to work through the local district office to see if they can, I mean, because I don't know if they will know off the top of their heads which ones have been sampled and which ones haven't. So, because some of it'll be, we've got data coming in a variety of different ways to the district office, including property transactions. So you would have baseline environmental assessments coming in, or you know, ongoing monitoring like it is at the SAPI site. So we would just have to go through every project file and see what the status is as to whether or not PFAS has been considered.
That is the last question I see in the chat.